Ladies and gentlemen, this is Cynthia the Audio Belle. I have a special treat for you guys today. I'll be reviewing the GoldenEar T66 floor standing speakers. I got to hear these speakers at Expono last year and was really impressed with their bass reproduction. So when I got them in for review, I was super excited to listen to songs that have bass. As it turned out, after listening to them for a few months, I got even more excited about their gorgeous top-end reproduction. To cut to the chase, if I had the money, I'd buy them. So let's talk a little bit about the T66. This speaker is GoldenEar's first release in what they call their T-series lineup of speaker. Not to be confused with their Trident series, which is a different lineup. You can purchase this speaker in black for $6,900 or this gorgeous candy apple red color for $7,200 a pair. Or you can buy the speakers individually if, for instance, you were wanting to introduce them eventually into a home theater setup. There's also this LFE input on the back if you were using them in a home theater setup. The speaker comes with a folded ribbon tweeter, 2 mid-range drivers, 2 active subwoofer drivers, which include built-in DSP, as well as 2 passive radiators. And you have the option to by-wire. If you notice on the back, there's this jumper that all you have to do if you prefer by-wiring is remove the jumper and connect up your by-wire cables, and you're good to go. One thing that really stood out to me about the speaker, though, was the aesthetics. Just to start, it's eye candy. And if you look at it, it has this beautiful grille on the front. And it's kind of crazy. They actually say in their manual not to take off the grille. And if you ever have to take off the grille, you need to send it into GoldenEar for service repair. It has this beautiful bass to it. And you have the option for either spiked feet or flat rubber feet, which depending on what type of floors you have, if you have carpet, you may prefer to use the spiked feet so that you don't leave an indentation from the flat rubber feet. And if you have wood floors, of course, you'd want to use the rubber feet so you don't scratch up your floors. Oh, and for the warranty, the speakers themselves have a 5-year warranty, and the electronics inside the cabinet have a 3-year warranty. They also have this bass knob on the back, or you could turn the bass down, or you can turn the bass up, depending on how much bass you need or you want. It starts out in the middle at 12 o'clock. I had mine turned to about, I would say, maybe 75% up, 3/4 of the way, because I do have a larger room. And that was pretty perfect. Now, there were some songs like modern electronic type songs that I preferred not to have it turned up that loud. And depending on your room or the level of bass that you prefer listening to, you may want to turn it down. So I really like that they have the option to be able to adjust that knob. Okay, so to talk about the subjective part of my review, again, the first thing I thought when I saw these speakers for the first time was absolutely, they get an A+ as far as wife acceptance factor goes. They're very slim in profile. The red, gorgeous. And I was really excited to get these a few months before Christmas because, well, the speakers are very Christmassy. Being that they're slim in profile, you can pretty much put them in the room and they don't take up a lot of space. My normal reference speakers are my husband's DIY open baffle speakers, and they take up most of the living room. So I really liked that the GoldenEars were just slim in profile and yet they packed a punch. I was actually pretty surprised because I have a fairly large room and I wasn't sure how they were going to work out. And as it turns out, I was able to pressurize the room with these speakers. So for my setup, I had a VPI Prime turntable with an airtight PC7 low output moving coil cartridge feeding into a Project DS 2-box phono stage, to my Pass X2 preamp, and then to a couple of Emotiva amps and then to the speakers themselves. And on the digital side, I've got Tidal for streaming going into a topping DAC and then feeding into the PASX2. So I think the thing that impressed me most about these speakers was actually their reproduction of their top end. High frequencies just sparkled as if I was listening to Magnepan speakers, which was really crazy to me. And the highs, the mids, and the lows of this speaker are very well balanced. You don't feel like you're missing something from a recording when you're listening with these speakers. At least in my experience with this review, I didn't feel like I was lacking anything in harmonics of different things like the male or female voice, the overall frequencies that a drum kit can reproduce, or the guitar strings being plucked. You could hear the low to high frequencies on all of these things, and it has girth. It doesn't sound like you're missing, a few frequency bands in there. That being said, these speakers aren't very forgiving to bad recordings, which in my opinion, that's a good thing. That tells me that these speakers are well made and that I'm getting a reproduction of exactly what's being played out of them for the most part. It was actually pretty cool because before the holidays, we had a few of our non-audiophile coworkers come over to listen to 3 different sets of speakers. Basically, we had a speaker shootout, and the GoldenEar was one of them. The other 2 were my Magnepan 3.7 eyes and Jeremy's DIY open baffles. We were just curious because all of us are engineers at our main job. So we were kind of wondering, well, what do these engineering, music-loving, non-audiophile coworkers think of the speakers? And can they pick out the differences among the 3? And immediately they picked out everything that we thought about the different speakers. The Magnepans, beautiful acoustics, beautiful top end and mids, was slightly lacking in the bass. The DIY open baffles, very well balanced, open and airy because they're also dipoles and they're open baffle. And then the GoldenEar T66 is actually, to date, the most impressive enclosed speaker that I have heard to date. I may hear another one, next month that may impress me more, but so far I've heard a lot of different speakers. The cabinet is going to be really your main issue when it comes to enclosed speakers. Most speaker designers have to go through a lot of challenges and hurdles to make sure that the cabinet doesn't cause any unwanted effects in sound reproduction when you're playing music out of the speakers. And I think that GoldenEar did a really great job with these cabinets. They almost don't exist in the room. The only criticism I have is that they're cabinet speakers, and there's really nothing, to be done about that. You can slightly tell if you are used to listening to different types of speakers, like dipole versus monopole, that there is that slight sound of, yes, they could be coming from a box, but it's so minor you can barely tell unless you've been listening to magneplaners, electrostats, or open baffle your whole life, and then you switch to these speakers.
Just a brief interruption, esteemed viewers. As you may know, I'm Tom Martin, Chief Content Officer of The Absolute Sound. We have a new product. It's on the Substack platform, and we're going to do some interesting things with Substack. First of which is reader questions and answers. Each Monday, readers will submit questions, we'll pick the most interesting ones, and we'll answer the questions on Friday. We'll also have early access to articles and special blogs that don't appear anywhere else. We hope you'll join us. It's only a cost of a cup of coffee per month. Just check on the screen or in the show notes below. Thanks, and now back to the show.
So how do these speakers compare to the Absolute Sound? Basically, can they reproduce sound that would fool you into thinking that a singer is in the room with you or a guitar string is being plucked? Well, they did a pretty darn good job. So the female vocalist was like the main thing that I noticed. Female voices sounded crystal clear and they sounded present in the room. I listened to Blue Bayou by Linda Ronstadt at a level that I feel like it would sound like if she was right in the room singing to me, maybe unmiked. If I was blindfolded, then I probably would think that she was in the room singing, and if I didn't know who she was, of course. Ella Fitzgerald, Carrie Underwood, Judy Collins, the main singer from Hiroshima, I don't know her name, but just a few that I can name that absolutely it sounded like that person was singing to me in the room. And I didn't get the impression that the voice was coming from a box. On top of that, female voices with complex harmonics, like they've got multiple different harmonics in their singing, was super impressive because these speakers are very well balanced with their drivers. Same with male voices. Male voices that primarily favored lower tones, these speakers were able to bring out, if the recording, of course, captured that. So I listened to The Ghost of Johnny Cash, a band, this guy who sounds pretty much identical to Johnny Cash, as if he were recording today with better equipment. And then I listened to Johnny Cash. Johnny Cash's recording wasn't as great, didn't quite capture those low tones and harmonics in his voice, whereas The Ghost of Johnny Cash's recording did. And these speakers were able to reproduce what was captured in that recording just perfectly. Besides that, I listened to some piano pieces, Jim Brickman, and it did sound like the piano was in the room. Piano, in my opinion, is pretty hard to reproduce. I always have a hard time being able to visualize the piano because oftentimes it either sounds larger than life, the imaging isn't quite right, or the piano just doesn't sound realistic. But in this case, it sounded pretty realistic. Guitar strings, I listened to some classical guitar from a John Williams album that I have. I play the classical guitar, so I know what it should sound like. And it did sound like there was a classical guitar being plucked and strummed in the room. You could hear the different nuances of the guitar. You can hear, the screeching sound as someone's moving up and down the fret, or the impact of a finger hitting the guitar string. You could hear just about every detail. So how it compared to the absolute sound, I would say that these speakers pretty much did a rock solid job of doing so. Oh, I almost forgot to mention percussion instruments. Percussion instruments were perhaps some of the most impressive to listen to with these speakers because they can be so complex. You have all kinds of ranges of frequencies with different percussion instruments. And the challenge is being able to have a subwoofer produce the low end fast enough for it to be caught up with the top end. If the top end of the drum and the low end of the drum doesn't sound like it's being properly played like you would hear it in real life, it's very noticeable. So the subs didn't seem to have any problems with being being too slow to be able to reproduce different sounds on a drum kit, different various percussion instruments that I listened to. So how well did the GoldenEar T66 reproduce a live orchestra? And this is an important question, and if you've seen any of my other reviews, you'll notice that I asked this in each one of them because it's really difficult for a speaker designer to reproduce that many instruments at the same time, and for something not to get lost in translation somewhere, whether it's the imaging or the soundstage or a specific focus often gets lost. If you can produce a speaker that can reproduce a live orchestra well, and it sounds like you're at the orchestra listening and you don't even have to get out of your house, that's how you know the speaker is a good speaker. So first orchestral piece I listened to was Spain, and it was performed by the Chicago Symphony Orchestra. This is actually a Chesky record. Chesky makes superb recordings, and they even have on the back of this record the process they went through on the pressing of the record. It's mostly analog to avoid anything going through multiple electronic panes of glass, so to speak. First impressions were violins sounded a little muffled at first, but once I started getting through the record, I didn't notice that anymore. I thought maybe it was something to do with these being cabinet speakers, but I could be completely way off base with that. Otherwise, everything sounded very on point, very accurate, even down to the bass drum that I heard. It didn't sound too overwhelming, and it sounded like I was at an orchestra. Second album I listened to was Isaac Stern's rendition with the National Symphony Orchestra of Tchaikovsky's Violin Concerto. And this was something that I actually got to hear the Oklahoma City Philharmonic perform, so I was able to compare with what I recalled hearing when I went to that performance in the fall. It was exactly how I remembered it for the most part. The quiet parts were quiet, the loud parts were loud. I, at this point in my listening, felt like I was able to encompass the whole girth of the orchestra with these speakers. There was nothing that these speakers outputted that was just wrong if the recording was good. Basically, the speakers played the orchestral instruments clearly, and they seemed to do very little to alter the original recordings that I'd listened to so far. Everything was very transparent. For cabinet speakers, they had depth as if I were listening to dipole speakers, which was quite impressive. It actually sounded like it was capturing the orchestral landscape of the stage. You could tell that the soundstage included instruments that were here, and you could even tell, this conductor decided to do this with his lineup versus another conductor. It was very easy to pick that apart, and the violins sounded very transparent. Okay, I won't bore you guys with too many more of these. I listened to way more than I'm going to show you, but I did want to give you guys a few samples of things that I just thought was super impressive. So, Fantasia, my pastor actually gave me this album, and I had seen parts of Fantasia. I've heard a lot of the music from Fantasia in different settings going to the orchestra, but I hadn't actually listened to this LP copy he'd given me yet. It was in pristine condition. I saw that one of the sides included Toccata. I always forget, is it Toccata Fugue in D minor, I think is what it's called. One of the most famous pieces ever. Sorcerer's Apprentice and The Nutcracker. So I decided to listen to that side at least. I had heard Toccata at a couple of different concerts. One of them, not really an orchestral concert, it was Lindsey Stirling, but the other one I actually heard at the Oklahoma City Philharmonic. They had a Gothic Midnight. So I was able to compare that with the OKC Phil's performance, and again, it was really impressive because it sounded just like when I went to the orchestra. The Nutcracker, I was going to see that this year, but I ended up being sick, so I didn't get to go. One thing I did want to call out about listening to the Nutcracker was the celesta, the instrument that makes the really sparkly sounds. Absolutely beautiful on these speakers. The reproduction of the celesta with these golden ears was amazing. So, final thoughts on how they reproduced a live orchestra. I know it sounds like I'm raving a lot about how great these speakers are, and you keep hearing the same thing, but overall, these are the most impressive speakers that I've heard reproduce an orchestra. And that's coming from somebody who has dipole speakers mainly in, her setup. So, very, very good job, GoldenEar, on making a pair of enclosed speakers that can reproduce an orchestra very accurately. Oh, and I did want to mention, I'm not somebody who binge listens to orchestral music a lot. I do love the orchestra. I love classical music, but it's not something I listen to every day and not something that I constantly listen to in, a listening session when I go just to sit down and listen to my system. But when I started listening to orchestral music with these speakers, I didn't want to stop. If you are a music lover and you can afford the price, these speakers might be for you. If you're an audiophile looking for a very well-balanced speaker that doesn't leave anything to be desired, this speaker is definitely for you. And if you have an interior decorator in the family, I don't think that you're going to have any issues with furniture placement. For the price point, I feel like these speakers are going to be very competitive on the market because there's speakers in this price point that can't do what these speakers can do. And then there's speakers that are higher priced than these that still can't do what these speakers can do. So I'm going to be really sad and heartbroken when I return these, which will be soon. But I really enjoyed my time listening with them and getting to review them for you guys. If you liked this review or if you found it helpful, let us know. And if you have a pair of golden ears or if you've ever listened to them before and you have any comments to share, post a comment in the comment box. We'd love to hear from you. This is Cynthia, the Audio Belle, signing out.